Good afternoon. My name is Casey Vermillion, and I work with Ask Resource Center. As you can tell from the name tag, I oversee the Ask Each Other Mentor Network. And so we have trained mentors like these three mentors that are going to be on the panel today that volunteer with us and get trained in how to support other families. And if you ever are interested in having a mentor or you would like to be a mentor, you can head to our website. And just what that means is we find a family comes in and they're say, maybe, I want someone that has another diagnosis similar to mine, or I want someone else who has navigated the transition process, or maybe it's, around, I want someone who's navigated this certain therapy that we're thinking about starting. And then my job is to help them find another family that's gone through a similar experience. So either we try within Iowa, but we also have a national mentor network that we can reach out to too for those things like rare diagnosis or just certain things that maybe we don't have someone here in the area for. So that's just a little bit about who I am. Got to put my plug in for the Ask Each Other Mentor Network. So today our presenters are Patty Origer, Cheryl and Emma, and Emma Bouza, and they are three of our mentors, like I said before. I'm going to tell you a little bit about them, and then we're just going to have kind of a laid-back, informal time of letting them share some of their experiences about what's worked and what hasn't, and then we'll open it up for question and answer at the end. So Patty serves as the Persons with Disability Ministry Coordinator for the Diocese of Des Moines, Iowa, a role she's filled since 2019. She holds a bachelor's degree in Health Information Management from the College of St. Mary in Omaha, Nebraska. Patty and her husband, Ed, are the parents of 4 children, the oldest of whom has cerebral palsy and intellectual disabilities. For several years, she was a stay-at-home parent to meet her son's health care needs. For the last 13 years, she has been on the faculty of the Des Moines Area Community College as a faculty member in health information technology and as a student advisor. Advocating for the needs of her son led Patty to advocate for all persons with disabilities. She became a resource and a mentor for other families and caregivers. While continuing her position at the community college, she began a newly created role of coordinator for persons with disabilities with the diocese. Her ministry role allows her to blend her love of her faith with her passion for advocating on behalf of individuals with disabilities. Cheryl is the mother of 3 and has been a stay-at-home mom since her youngest's birth. In addition to being her daughter's primary caregiver, Cheryl has volunteered in several different areas. For 8 years, she was a board member and a volunteer for Families for Hope, an international nonprofit dedicated to supporting families affected with, oh, help me, Cheryl. Okay, holoprosencephaly. Okay, I'm sorry I didn't make HPE. Okay, I'm sorry that I didn't make sure I knew how to say that appropriately. And continue as a family mentor. She's also very involved with her church, specifically 6 years as the chairperson of the ministry board. Through the school district, Cheryl served on several committees throughout the years. Through the University of Iowa, she participates in the LEND program, PAM, or Parents as Mentors, and physician training, and additional parent panels through the AEA and other organizations as requested. Emma is from Northwest Iowa. She's a dedicated wife to Ben and mom to Nora, who's 16, and Ruby, who's 14. With a deep commitment to education, Emma recently completed her master's in special education and has spent the last 8 years working in the field. She's also actively involved in various local and state boards and committees. Emma recently ran for the Iowa House of Representatives, advocating for greater support and resources for individuals with disabilities. In addition, she founded Ruby's Red Bags, whose mission is dedicated to equipping first responders with sensory-friendly bags designed to help children and adults with sensory processing needs during emergencies. Emma worked with legislators in Iowa to pass Ruby's Law, which ensures individuals with disabilities cannot be denied an organ transplant solely based on their diagnosis. So, as you can tell, we have 3 amazing women in front of you. Today they're gonna have on their parent hat, and we're gonna talk through some questions just kind of that they have thought through a little bit. So I'm gonna talk less and let them talk more, and then at the end we'll have some time for you to ask questions as well. I'm just gonna pull up the questions here. So if each of you could take turns, and I'm sorry I read their bio in a different order than they're sitting, so I don't want people to be confused, but We'll start here with Patty, and if you could take 3 to 5 minutes and just give us a little bit of your story.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. As my bio said, my name is Patty Origer. I live in Adel. My husband and I have been blessed with 4 children. As the bio said, my oldest son, Jeremy, has cerebral palsy, and he began his therapies when he was 6 months old and was diagnosed. Our other kids are Carissa, Rachel, and Patrick. They always tell me, don't forget to mention us, so we're not left out. So I'm doing their plug today. And we do have 2 son-in-laws, Thomas and Wyatt. Just one side note on my daughter, Carissa, she went to school to become a physical therapist because she started going to physical therapy when she was 2 weeks old and with her brother, and she did therapy with him thinking it was playtime because that's what we did at our house. So that's just kind of a side note. You never know where your family's going to be blessed at. I currently work, as my bio said, the Persons with Disability Ministry Coordinator for the Diocese of Des Moines. Our son Jeremy has cerebral palsy. In his case, he has hemiparesis, or weakness, on his left side, and has significant only gross motor skill with his left hand. He can walk and run and ride a bike, but he does have a significantly smaller and weaker left leg and arm, and he wears an AFO to help with his gait. He has a mild intellectual disability, has had vision loss in his right eye with some left peripheral vision loss. He's had seizures for the first 7 years of his life, but thankfully they've been controlled, and he continues to take a low-dose seizure medicine. He also has ADD and a mood disorder and has had some, what the doctors call autism tendencies with some of his behaviors, such as perseveration and getting stuck on things. So my husband and I like to say that we're a jack of many diagnoses and disabilities, but we're not the master of any. Jeremy graduated from ADM High School in 2012, so it's been a long time since I've done an IEP, so I had to really kind of think back about that, but hopefully I'll have some experiences to share. When he was ready to leave high school, he was done with high school activities. He didn't want to do anything anymore, and so we knew it was time for him to transition out of our home, so we moved him into a group home because we still had other kids that needed to go to activities, and we couldn't get him to movies and social events like he wanted to do. And so the first 5 years he lived in a group home, and that went okay for him. He had one roommate for about 3 years, and then they became 3 of them, and it went pretty well. But there was some conflicts because Jeremy was like to be active and go out and do things, and his roommates weren't as active. So then he would get bored being home, and then when Jeremy's bored, he gets in trouble because he tries to do things, and he's really good at manipulating new staff to let him do what he wants. And there's a lot of turnover, unfortunately, in the group home he was at. And so we did have him transition to 1 year to Waukee, where he lived in that group home, to work on employment skills and learn where his interests and skills were at, because many years ago there's a lot more opportunities now than there was back then, even for pre-employment training. So I'm thankful for where things have gone since he's been in high school. He now lives in what's called a host home. He's been in a host home for 7 years, and that has been a really good fit for Jeremy. I'm thankful for him to have that option. The lady he works with keeps him busy, getting him to work, getting him out in the community, helping him with social activities, going to the movies, bowling, things that he really enjoys, swimming. And she's able to keep him active so he doesn't get in trouble and think about things that he can get away with and manipulate and those types of things. And he also, the other thing, he worked at Hy-Vee for a few years, and then about 2.5 years ago, he transitioned to work at Christ the King Catholic School on the south side. He is a teacher's helper in their after-school daycare. So when he was hired, he loved to tell people he works 5 days a week, Monday through Friday, 2 hours a day from 3 to 5. Don't we all want a job like that? And then on the summer, he does get to work 20 hours a week when the kids aren't in school, so he likes that. And he also, when he was first hired, he loved to tell people how much he made. That was his big thing. But he really doesn't tell that anymore. That's not important to him. That's not why he works. His goal to work is he loves to be with what he calls the kiddos. And his favorite thing is to do when he goes to church and the kids come up and recognize him and give him a big hug. So that's his favorite thing about his job. There has been some tough times, as you know, as parents of children with disabilities, some struggles along the way, especially during Jeremy's teenage years when we were dealing with his hormones and his behaviors and trying to figure out what medications work for him. So that was a really tough time in our time. But now Jeremy is happy and outgoing and a friendly young man, and he truly gives the best hugs, and he brings joy and entertainment to our lives and the people he knows. So thank you for your time today.
I'm Emma Bouza. My husband Ben and I have 2 daughters. Ruby is 14 and Nora is 17 now since I wrote that bio. So Nora's a junior this year, and she has a 504, and she's had a 504 I think for the last 2 years. And then Ruby is in 7th grade, and she's had an IEP since she's had an IFSP. So we had a prenatal diagnosis with Ruby at 27 weeks. I guess I should say what she has. She has Down syndrome. I don't think I threw that in there, but so yeah, Ruby has Down syndrome. We had a prenatal diagnosis, and honestly, that while I was still pregnant with her is kind of where our advocacy began before she was even born, because as soon as we got the diagnosis and they recommend termination, and we had to try to convince the doctor that that's not what we wanted to do. So it was a whole advocacy thing that we were totally not prepared for, but I feel like we've got it figured out now. Yeah, we've been doing all right. So Ruby is fully included in school in gen ed. She's thriving. She's doing grade level work in 7th grade. I think she does math that I probably don't know how to do, which is, sometimes I stop and think, I'm like, why am I the one questioning what she's capable of doing? But some days I'm like, how is she even doing that? But her dad's a math teacher, so it makes sense. So Ruby does spend a lot of her life kind of breaking down barriers and stereotypes and stuff. I mean, as I said, like, she does grade level work and stuff. She also is a big fan of trying to dispel the myth that people with Down syndrome are happy all the time. She is not. She very much not. So I would say, like, she's fully included, and I would say if she doesn't have friends, it's 100% on her, because she's kind of a jerk sometimes. But I mean, whatever. She knows what she wants. But so yeah, there's that. So her main diagnosis obviously is Down syndrome, but she also has a lot of other diagnoses. I always like to say she collects diagnosis, but we have, I think, 10 or 11 specialists we see now. So yeah, like you said, we just collect those diagnoses. We're not experts in any of them, but we've got a solid collection of doctors, a good team, and they all kind of, I always say she's like a puzzle, and all those little pieces kind of fit together to make her who she is. She's not necessarily, I think it's funny because her chart says she's medically complex. She's a relatively healthy child. She's not, I don't know, it just seems silly to put that label on her, but she does have a lot of other medical needs that maybe don't typically come with Down syndrome, but she does have them. And then I think what's interesting though, like I said, we started advocating for her before she was born, and Nora was only 2, but having Ruby has kind of made me a better advocate for Nora as well, because Nora got her 504 in high school, and because we've had Ruby, I was able to advocate and know what she could qualify for and what she needed, and I had those connections already, so I was able to get that set up really easily for Nora. If there's an advantage to all of this, I think that that was a huge advantage for our family. Also, the fact that my husband and I both work in the building that both of our girls are in right now. So I don't know. I think that's about it about me. That's good.
Hi, my name is Cheryl Lehman, and I have a husband, Bill, and he is wonderful with our daughter. A big help. I have 3 kids. I have a 28-year-old daughter who is a music teacher, a 26-year-old son who is going for his pilot's license. And and that was Kira and Colin, because I always have to remember to mention them too. And then my youngest daughter will be 24 on May 22nd, and her name is Chloe. And I brought some pictures, and I had to bring this one because I have to make sure I have one of my other two kids in there, and the dog. And you can't see this, but she does smile. I noticed that, the pictures I brought, she wasn't smiling, but she does smile. Chloe, all three of my pregnancies were the same. I had no indication that anything was going to be different. And at that time, almost 24 years ago, they did not do ultrasounds unless they were necessary, medically necessary. So we had no idea. But she was born typical, except for she had a midline cleft lip, which is very rare. And immediately all the doctors who saw her suggested she possibly had holoprosencephaly, which is a brain malformation that by 8 weeks gestation, the neural tube starts to separate into the two hemispheres, and something goes wrong at that time. So there's a lot of, like if you've heard of a cyclops, there are children that are born cycloptic, but they normally don't survive. So everything midline can be affected. Anyway, and holoprosencephaly can affect 1 out of every 250 pregnancies, so it's not real rare. Most miscarry by 8 weeks old. So out of all of those children that have holoprosencephaly, only 3% are born alive, and of that 3%, only 1% live past 6 months. So she's going to be 24. They're getting to be more and more interventions to help our children to survive. So there's more and more. I think those numbers are a little skewed now because they've been the same since she was born 24 years ago. So there are some that are in their 30s, and the severity can be different. Actually, there's some people could be walking around that have a very mild form and they wouldn't even know it unless they have an MRI. There's some that are just intellectually affected. But Chloe actually is not on the most severe end, but because of her brain abnormality, what you would call the symptoms, she is considered severe. She has CP, she has epilepsy, uncontrolled seizures, she's tube-fed, non-ambulatory, nonverbal, very medically fragile. In fact, last year on February 21st, she was released from the hospital after being there for 2 months on hospice, and they gave us 2 weeks. And she's still here, but she's on oxygen all the time, and I can't say that she's, she has her medical problems, but she's still here, she still smiles, and she's the toughest kid I'll ever know. So anyway, she aged out of the school system in 2022, but yeah, we've had a lot of experiences with IEP, so feel free to ask us any questions you have after we go through, because that's where I know I've learned the most throughout the 24 years with Chloe is from other parents. So.
Thank you so much. I know that we've talked a lot, but I feel like I even learned more. So, and we appreciate you sharing in this room so that we can all get to know you each a little bit more. So as we continue on, and I know we have kind of some young adults and older children here, but my thought with that was that that's great because, I know some families are getting ready to transition and things like that. And even though it's been a little while since some of you have navigated this, then you can give your perspective even in the older ages too, with the schools and things. So thank you for being here. The next question we're going to go through is a 2-part question. I'll talk through both of it. It's kind of a long one, and then you can kind of pick or choose. I know you've seen it before already, but kind of how you want to answer that. So what has been your relationship with educators, and how has that affected what has gone well in an IEP or an IFSP transition meeting? So IEP is the part B, so 3-year-old to 21-year-old. And then the IFSP, in case anyone's wondering, I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with that, is the early access part C. Okay, so sorry. So What has been your relationship with educators? How has that affected what's gone well in an IEP or an IFSP transition meeting? And how has your relationship with educators impacted any opportunities for improvement and or change? So I guess you can kind of pick from that, from your experience.
I sat in the wrong seat. I get to go first every time, so. No, I'll just start with this one. Next I'll let somebody go first. So it's been 13 years since I've done an IEP, so I had to really rack my old brain cells to figure out what was going on. But overall, our experiences were positive most of the time. I said the biggest struggles that I remember us having is when we moved from Ankeny to Adel, and in that transition IEP meeting, the Adel school sent the school principal, because at that time they didn't have a special ed director, and they didn't send the special ed teacher. So that transition, I think, would have went more smoother if we would have had somebody other than, I shouldn't say just the principal, but somebody with more of that special ed experience. And then when we did move, I mentioned Jeremy graduated from ADM and went through the ceremony, but went to Waukee for a year. We did have a special ed director from Waukee schools as a receiving school, and I think that transition went a little bit better. So that is my, I guess, one piece of advice. And when he was in high school, we really wanted Jeremy to have the high school experience. We weren't so tied up on him learning employment skills and transition things. We wanted him he was able to learn to play the trumpet. With his one hand, he's a one-handed trumpet player. And I had a lot of practice sessions with him that weren't always the smoothest in the world, but that was a social opportunity for them. And we tried to make it a high school experience, and then we were going to kind of think about employment after he was done, but that was just our choice as his parents. To make it more of the social and learning opportunities, because he liked to learn about history and things like that. So we tried to include him in those classes as they went along. And I guess the most important thing is just working with the teachers, building those relationships. Even what the keynote speaker talked about, having that civility and building those relationships and trying to keep calm in the heated situations, which, as she said, is very hard to do. And then the other thing that I remember is when he was little, and he went to special ed preschool when he was 2 years old because they had room before he was 3, and they allowed him to send him. I put him on a little bus when he was just not even 2.5 years old, which was traumatic for his young mom. But just that at one of the first IEP meetings, and there's like 8 professionals around the table, and you're like, oh my gosh. And I remember one of them said, we're all here to support your family. Don't be scared to ask questions. And that's my big thing. Don't be scared to ask questions, and know your rights before you go into those meetings, because they truly want what's best for your child too. But you are the person that knows your child best. So you need to be their advocate. And that's the most important thing in my mind.
Okay, the question started with what has been our relationship with educators, and I feel like we're in a unique situation since my husband and I are coworkers with most of our teachers, since we both work in the district. So that has been helpful, and it's kind of an obstacle sometimes too. Last year she transitioned to middle school, and that is a whole other ballgame when you're going from elementary to middle school. And she had a first-year special ed teacher. It was messy. At one point, my husband and I got pulled into the principal's office and told that we needed to be aware of how intimidating we are as parents to the staff in the building, to which we were like, now think of how other parents coming in feel when they're sitting at a table full of professionals. Like, it's not on me how you're feeling about my presence in the room, but so yeah, that was kind of a big obstacle, doing that whole transition into middle school. We worked through it. Things are good now. But yeah, ultimately being in the building and working in the district has been a huge benefit for her and for us. We're always there if something comes up. We're also able to kind of identify systemic gaps within the district and then we can kind of provide feedback or kind of gently mold how we want things to look as she's getting older. So that is a good advantage that we have, that not every parent is going to. And if we're trying to make systemic changes, since we're so intimidating, it's really hard for them to say no then. So it works out pretty well.
Well, we've had some very positive interactions and relationships with teachers, and then we've had some very negative. Since Chloe is nonverbal, I have always, I'm a hands-on. So that's what my relationship with the teachers would be, is hands-on. And with the paras and the whole, because she cannot tell me. So communication is huge between the whole team, and especially, with us too. So Chloe had, written communication daily, and then plus she would hit a switch and it would have a recording of the para or whatever for what she did during that day. So we're very hands-on, and I would make appearances like, when you have infants and they say, stop in and don't announce yourself. I will tell you that up until the very last year Chloe was in school, they were very supportive. And that last year, the schools are trying to, I think, control the dialogue. And so when I would come in and, I'd have to sign in and then I'd just want to go to the room, there would be an associate principal running to the room, why are you here? So now I don't know how open that is, but when you have a nonverbal child, it's like having an infant. You need to know what's going on, and you need to watch your kids. So we've had some very awesome teachers that, and I would say those are the ones that were open communication, and if she wasn't succeeding in an area, would think outside of the box or reach out for other help. And then some negative where every time I went there, they were watching a movie, because most of Chloe's, she wasn't integrated much in junior high and high school. And, unlike these guys, that was okay with me because her needs were far different than what she could get in a regular education setting. And, there's some of the, like band, they included her in choir, but she'd sit outside the door and listen. That wasn't quite right. But there were some, maybe an art class, we would come up and they had an adaptive PE where best buddies and stuff would come in with them. So those things were really cool. But our experiences, because of my daughter's needs, are different. And that's one thing that I stressed in one of them, and I'll go into that with the next question more, but always remember that IEP is individualized, and the school districts, it seems to me, want to a lot of times put them in a bucket, and it can't be that way. Our kids have different needs, and so like they were saying, the parents are the advocates. You know what your child needs, and unfortunately, we learned when she was born, everybody was saying all of her 12, 15 different doctors or whatever, you're going to have to advocate for. And really, I didn't feel that until she turned 3 and started in the schools. And I was like, holy cow, now I know what they're talking about. Because when we went to our first IEP, and it was a fairly good-sized school district, college community school district in between Cedar Rapids and Iowa City. It was a growing. We went to that first meeting and they were like, we don't have a program for her, so we're gonna bus her to Cedar Rapids. And I was like, so you're just talking preschool? And they said, no, K through 12. And I was like, what? This is a pretty good-sized district. Chloe is not the first one, and she's not the last. And they had all these excuses. Like, first of all, they said they don't have a level 3 program. And that wasn't true. They had kids with Down syndrome and autism. They just didn't have somebody in a wheelchair with medical needs. Then they said, oh, we don't have a teacher. Well, that wasn't true because my other 2 kids went to school, and there was a teacher that was there that came up when she saw Chloe and was like, oh my gosh, I wondered where these kids were. I used to work in a level 3 program in Florida with, at that time they called it severe and profound, and that's what but they don't call it that anymore. But anyway, and I was like, yes, you do. And this was over a number of meetings. This isn't just one. We had to do our homework. But, and then they said, well, we don't have the equipment. And I said, my husband can build anything. I will write grants. I will do whatever. So anyway, she got in, and I tell you what, at one point there were 5 kids like her in her class that were nonverbal, non-ambulatory. So unfortunately, I learned really quick. I got thrown into the fire that, and all of her early access therapists and even that teacher that ran into us, and all of them were saying, we've been telling college community that they need to step up, but they won't listen to the professionals. Guess who they listen to? And it's sad, but it takes the parents to make change. And it's the ones that are overwhelmed, getting no sleep, don't know what they're doing, but those are the ones that makes the change. So she was able to go with her 2 older siblings to be in the same district, and that was what was important to me, is that she was in the school with her siblings. But anyway, I probably went off target about our relationship, but I will tell you, some of her teachers and her paras are friends for life. So I've had, like I said, there's positive and there's negative in everything.
So before I start this third question, for Patty's sake, we'll let someone else go first, and you ladies can mix it up. So this last question that we have is, what suggestions do you have for improving these types of meetings with educators and school teams? So I know we've touched on some things, but if there's anything else you want to share, and then we'll open it up for questions. Looks like Emma's ready to go.
Unless you really want to go first. Okay. I think we've all said it already, but communication is always going to be the most important thing. But also, the longer Ruby is in school, my advice to parents is always to assume that we all have her best interests in mind. We may just be taking different paths to get to the answer, but that also emphasizes why communication is so important. I think a lot of times there's a mentality that it's that us versus them, and that it's easy to fall into that. And I don't know that that's ever super productive though either, because like I said, I feel like at the end of the day, teachers do have your child's best interest at heart. It may not look like it sometimes, and it may not feel like it, but they're really there to do what's right for everybody. And so that, like I said, that all goes back to communication though too. And don't be afraid to ask for clarification if you feel like something's not working. Or, there may be a valid reason that you're not able to see as a parent not in the school for why they're doing something the way they are. But again, communication. But yeah, it all boils down to communication and teamwork. We're a team, and like I said, I don't ever want it to be an us versus them situation, or we're intimidating and scary and they're not, it's better to go into it with a positive mindset that we're all working together.
I had that too. Not us, them, it's a team. But she's like thinking positive. And it is for the most part, but I will give a couple of examples. For one thing, like, we had received a notice of change on Chloe's IEP one time, and it was they were going to take OT away from her. And this was like a 2-hour IEP meeting. And thankfully, they let us know beforehand, because towards the end of her schooling, we got one of those notice of changes at the IEP. And I'm like, that should have been given to us beforehand. And anyway, but back to the other one, they were going to take OT away from her. And I was like, now wait a minute, because isn't this I learned early on that the therapy they receive in school is different than private therapy. You're supposed to look at it differently. Therapy in school is supposed to be so they can be included in the school, activities. And so I was like, she was going into third grade. I was like, well, wouldn't that be great? Why were you taking OT, right? If Chloe could hold her pencil and even if she's just scribbling, that she could feel like she's, participating with her classmates. And there was a liaison there that said, well, once she does that, you're going to want more. And I was like, absolutely. I said, did you teach your kids their numbers and then stop there? No, then you went on to addition, subtraction. I thought, and then I said, I was talking about, IDEA law, and he says, well, the goal of IDEA is also to get them off of the program. And I was like, yeah, but not until they're at age level with their peers. Those stuck in my mind. And so you're talking, it's supposed to be a team, and I thought, no, it is us against them. I'm fighting them for my kids. And that meeting, you do have to, I have definitely learned that you have to use honey and not vinegar, because fighting with them is not going to do anything. So the 2-hour meeting was back and forth. So finally, to be honest with you, we compromised, and they reduced the number of hours of OT that she had. And that was from third grade until she was in 12th grade. Because I was told that once they lose a service, it's hard to get it back. So that's why we were adamant. And one other thing that I always, I hate to say fight, but advocate, I should say, was they used to want to come, and I do understand that I think they weren't seeing the progress with Chloe that they would see with somebody with autism or Down syndrome or but to me, if it's not working, then we need to do something else. Start thinking outside of the box. How can we help her progress instead of let's just give up and take away her services? And that's where I kind of felt like for a while. But anyway, so the other thing I was going to say is that they always would come and say on the IEP, they want to change it from being one-on-one help to consult. They wanted to be in a, like the therapist on a consultative. I'm like, no. I'm like, how do you consult the teacher and the paras on how to work with my child if you're not ever sitting down and working with them or her themselves? Because you can't, how do you know without hands-on experience? So we always advocated against that. And so sometimes we had to compromise and reduce the number of minutes or whatever, but we were never really ready to let that go. So I would, suggest, because there was many times where I had to stress it's individualized. The other area where we always had to advocate was with the paras. So like the school district wanted to make a big, a new rule that the paras couldn't follow the students from year to year because they'd get attached, and then they wouldn't, they didn't want a child with Down syndrome holding the hand of their para down the hall. I understand that. But I was like, that's not my child. My child loves everyone, and she will, she will do what, she will perform for anybody. She'll do what she's supposed to for anybody. But since she's so severe and she doesn't have a voice other than, maybe the way she looks or whatever, this person's really got to know her. There was one time the para called me and said, let me know and said, something's up with Chloe. Well, she was having constant seizures and ended up in the hospital. If it hadn't been for that para had been with her for 3 or 4 years, she wouldn't have had a clue. So, yeah. So anyway, so sometimes, the district will say, well, this is district policy. Well, sometimes that policy isn't work for your child. And so, yeah, sometimes you have to advocate and make a change for your child. I'm trying to think. But now, as far as the IEP themselves, one thing that I would have the IEP during the day if I could, because to me, the integral part of the team is the para. That is the person who's with my child all day, working with my child all day, and if she doesn't know, or he, what the goals are And if they're not there when the therapists come during the daytime working with her, they don't know how to work with her. And so I valued their opinion on what was working and not working. And so many times I'd have the IEP during the day because the district won't pay overtime to have the para come in. And they usually say the para can't be involved, but you can invite whomever you want to the IEP. Now, whether or not they'll honor it, I can't say. But many times they did honor that, and the para was able to join us during the meetings. I'm trying to think if I... Well, another thing is consistency. There's got to be consistency with how they're working with, especially in Chloe's case, how they're working with her in school and how we work with her in home. So again, the communication piece is crucial, because if the therapist at school is saying we need to try this, then I need to know that so I can follow through at home, and she'll have maybe a chance at a better success. Anyway, I know I'm missing some things, but those are the things that were important to me. And we've had, and I was going to tell you, the best IEP we ever had was in middle school. And this teacher was phenomenal. She thought outside the box and included the kids. And I'll tell you why it was so good, because she included me in the planning process. So Chloe's goals, we had met with a therapist. She had met with me. And her goals were laid out. It was just a formality. We showed up. She had videos of Chloe working in school, and even some of her regular education teachers were like, wow, I didn't know she could do that. That is really cool. She had pictures of what she could do. She had videos, and all it was a formality. This is her goal, we've decided, and this is where we're at, and here's a video showing her working on it. This. It was absolutely the best. I did not go in there feeling like I was going to throw up. It was awesome because I felt at ease because I knew what I was walking into. So IEPs can be fantastic team, meetings if they're done correctly. Anyway, thank you. Sorry.
That's the best thing about being last. They said all the great advice and things, but just to reiterate, communication is really important to build that relationship with the people that support your child, especially the paras and the teachers, and then review the information on the IEP and know ahead of time before you go into the meeting and the data that they share you, and write down those questions that you don't want to forget to ask. So that's the biggest suggestion that I have, other than the great advice these ladies already provided. So.
Now we're going to open up for questions. If anybody has any questions that you'd like to ask, and first I want to say thank you to all three of you for being here, for taking time to do this. But we're going to ask, so we're going to take questions a little bit longer here, and then that'll wrap up our session for today. But let's. Yes, I'd be happy to. So the question, just because I know I want to repeat it so everyone heard it, is just how Ask can help with an IEP meeting. And so there's a few different ways that can happen. As you might know, if you head to our website and click on the Contact tab, there's a way that you can fill out, we call it an intake, or just kind of a request for help. And then one of our family support specialists will give you a call. And there's a few different things that'll take place. You can kind of share your experience. Sometimes people call and this is the diagnosis that we've gotten and we want some assistance, but you can also say, I have an upcoming meeting, the school is telling me this, and we can work with you. I say we, this will not be me, it will be the other amazing family support specialists that do this role, but they can walk through and help you prepare for that meeting. They might help you, they're really great at helping you kind of take all those things that you're thinking through and processing and kind of coming up with your priorities. They can give you advice, kind of like some of the things that have been said here today, like how do you take, because we all know as parents, I'm also a parent of children with special needs, you get so emotional, and it's a good reason to be emotional, but they can help you kind of think through how to take the emotion out of it and how to advocate and get your experiences out clearly. Sometimes we have families that want them to actually look through the IEP before the meeting, and so you can digitally send that over, and they can review it with you, help you prepare. We know it can be confusing. We actually did just do a webinar too. If you want to, we did some webinars through the IEP on our YouTube channel. So that's another thing, but they can help you do that. They can help you even debrief afterwards. Like, this is how the meeting went. This is what, these are some questions that I have, or the school said this. What are my rights in that area? Sometimes when there's been maybe just if there has been such a breakdown in communication that there's, you feel like, and they help you decide that you've maybe gotten to the point where you're unable to advocate effectively in those meetings, or maybe you've tried with some suggestions, then sometimes they will also attend with you if that is deemed a necessary step as well. So, yeah, thank you. Any other questions for our panelists, or that I can help with? Yes. So the question was how the IEP changes as they're moving from elementary school, the one primary teacher, to middle school, to multiple teachers. Do you want to speak to that a little bit?
She's recently experienced that. So.
I think really when you're in elementary, you have your team. As you transition to middle or high school, your team just gets bigger. So the gen ed teachers all are invited. That doesn't necessarily mean they're all going to come, but they're all invited to the meeting. And then, I guess this is how our district does it. And then they're all invited to give input on how your child's doing in their classes. Just real quick for the camera. She just said that she includes in her IEP that she writes in a mandatory half-hour training for all staff that has contact with her son. Parent-led training. I was going to say too, your team, in our district, the IEP will have like 30 minutes collaboration with gen ed teachers too. So your special ed teacher should be collaborating with the gen ed teachers to come up with modified or accommodated work for your students. So that's how the team part comes into play too.
One thing she said that I wanted to bring up is that there were a number of times through the years Chloe was in school that they said, oh, it's not in the IEP, but we're going to do it every day. Well, I understand that that IEP is a legal document. Put it in the IEP, because if it's not in there, they don't have to do it. She asked who writes the IEP, and it's supposed to be a team effort, but somebody's got to make the goals. So like in Chloe's case, she had OT, PT, speech, she had all of the therapies. And so I didn't know what I was doing, when Chloe first entered the school, when she, I didn't have any experience with people with special needs. It wasn't by choice that this was thrown into my world. Now, I would honestly, I've been on these panels before and somebody say, well, I wouldn't change my kid for the world. Well, I'd be lying if I said that, because I definitely would. But God had another plan, and he gave me her, and she's challenging, but she's been the biggest blessing and brought the most wonderful people into our lives, and now I can see the beauty in her life. She has purpose. But but originally I was not involved at all with the goals because I didn't know what I was doing. So initially it would be the therapists and the special education teacher or the teachers, and then you get involved and then it evolves from there. She asked how would parents even know what you can ask for. Yeah. And I think there's tools like the Ask resource, and I had a parent education partnership that was at the AEA when we started, when we found out that Chloe was not going to be included in the district that we were in. That helped us with that. But yeah, and talking to other parents, I mean, we just learn from each other.
I was just going to add that if it seems silly to add into the IEP, do it anyhow. We had that Ruby could have seconds of vegetables in her IEP at one point because the kitchen staff was being really weird about it, and it avoided having a meltdown at lunchtime. And so we just put it in our IEP. I had it in there. I mean, like, really, that's so dumb, but it was in there. I had at one point that I wanted, and it's much, having Achieve is much easier now, but I also had it in her IEP at one point that I wanted physical data sent to me every 2 weeks. That way it was holding them accountable, but I'm also a nerd and I liked seeing it, but it's kind of a twofold because it held them accountable too, but that was specifically put in there that it was supposed to be sent home. So I mean, you can put whatever you want in there. There's no limits really, I don't think.
I was also just going to say, I feel like some school districts or schools too, it's like kind of like you're saying, sometimes they don't necessarily tell you everything you need to know, but you have to just know the questions to ask. It's not even, not even getting forceful, but just like kind of that, help me understand, isn't it supposed to be, and I feel like a lot of those questions you don't know to ask because you don't know your rights. And that's one thing that I love about Ask. I mean, we had that in our own personal story. I didn't know. I thought something was off. I asked a couple questions and suddenly a whole program was made, and so it's like just learning those questions. And so we did actually just walk through goals, what a good goal should entail, because I know sometimes some teachers do kind of get in a pattern of using the same goals for different kids. And so I feel like we have to learn as parents what those good goals can look like before we know the questions to ask and how to suggest, like you're saying, how to suggest what goes in that goal. And so if you head to our YouTube channel, that was yet another thing that we talked about when we were going through the IEP. And I think that hopefully helps you to know and be brainstorming ideas. But did you have a question? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep. So she's asking if her son has a 504, at what point she considers asking for an IEP. So do one of you want to talk to this at all, or do you want? Yeah. Do you want to speak? I was gonna say we're intimidated because we have. Here, I'm gonna give you the microphone because. Just kind of what to consider and when to, yeah. Do you want to speak to it? Do you want to speak to it? I'm okay with either of you.
Because a lot of the 504 is focused on accommodations. So when you're looking at, so the difference is when you look at an IEP, you're looking at individualized instruction. You're looking at specially designed instruction. They may modify the curriculum. Right, so right now he's not getting the curriculum modified. He'll probably just, like I said, focus. And if you also see that he's starting to have, he's falling behind his peers. So they look at the same age peers, and they look to see if there's a discrepancy between his progress. He's progressing a lot slower, or he needs, like I said, they need to maybe this. I find that a lot of my, like, depending on the it's a non-categorical state, right? But depending on the disability, so learning disabilities, right? Sometimes they don't know, but then they realize they have to modify the instruction, right? It has to be at Orton Gillingham, or they have to start looking at. So when you start looking at that, looking at the course content, or it could be a behavior plan, right? So it's not always necessarily academic. It could be that there's a lot of challenging behaviors that, they can't really serve through a 504. Or I have some students who have a speech-only IEP. So they might, the 504 is not going to help them. They have a speech therapy IEP. So you have to start kind of looking at when you start seeing the 504 isn't giving enough supports. And there's starting to, some issues are starting to happen. They're getting academic frustration. They're coming home. They're masking, during the day. And then they're having behaviors you didn't see before, but now they're having. So there might be some clues that you're going to see, and that would be a good time to ask for an eligibility determination to see. And then they might have to, obviously collect some data, do some observations.
And that's another thing we'll help you with if you're, because I know we have some handouts for parents on things like that, like when to, or how to request an IEP, and because there's some, sometimes if you just say it verbally, it might kind of get swept under the rug. So we have some suggestions how to do it in writing and stuff. So feel free to reach out. And I always say, if you've reached out to ask, and maybe you even got the information that was sent to you, and you're like, okay, but now I don't understand this, like, reach back out. Like, there's not like a limit. It's not like you only can reach us once every year or something. Like, you can reach back out and we'll keep helping you. So don't feel like you've reached your max or something, because we know it's confusing and we know it's overwhelming, and that's why we do what we do. So I just want to thank the three of you so much for being here. Thank you, everyone, for your great questions and for keeping this discussion going. And we're really thankful for all of your participation. So thanks so much.